Here we look at the scheme that we have been following. We started with Newton's law. For ith particle, it is mass times acceleration is equal to the external force plus the forces from the constraints. And we had difficulty in finding out or writing down the constraint forces. At least it's not straightforward in every case. So a better alternative was D'Alembert's principle, where we do not need the constraint force directly, but we need the knowledge of constraint from which we create the virtual displacements for ith particle. The virtual displacements are commensurate with constraints, and we take the dot product with the remaining part of the equation of motion, that is the mass times acceleration, the inertia part, and subtract from that we take the external force. And so basically mass times acceleration minus the external force dot product with virtual displacement gives us an effective equation of motion. It's not very easy to handle. A comparatively easier situation is encountered with Lagrange's equation of the first kind, where for ith particle, not like a sum in D'Alembert's case, for ith particle we have here the mass times acceleration minus the external force, and then we kind of calculate the constraint force from the constraints for all holonomic constraint and certain non-holonomic constraint, where we take a part of the constraint or the special derivative of the constraint, gradient of the constraint, which is more like a perpendicular vector on the constraint surface. We take their linear combination, and intuitively we expect that the vectors perpendicular to constraint surface should be collinear with the constraint forces. So their linear combination should give us the constraint force. Here the lambda m and mu n are unknown quantities, which after we solve this equation, there are 3n equation and k number of unknown, this del lambda m and mu n. If we solve them, then we get the unknowns plus the equation of motion for the remaining independent variables. The trouble is, this dealing with constraints is not particularly a palatable solution for many physicists. I mean, it's messy. A much better option would be to work with an equation of motion where there are no constraints. So for that, we introduce the concept of generalized coordinates, and we show that starting from D'Alembert's principle, one can get Euler-Lagrange equation or Lagrange's equation of second kind, a more general version, using the generalized coordinates. The generalized coordinates are essentially a set of independent coordinates whose number is equal to the degrees of freedom of the system. So if we have n particle, which gives us 3n coordinates to deal with, and suppose we have k number of constraints, then after removing this constraint, we should end up with 3n minus k number of independent coordinates. We call them generalized coordinates. Now, there are of course no unique choice of independent coordinates. This q1, q2 up to qn. These can be selected in different ways. And of course, if the constraint involves explicit function of time, then these constraints are rheonomic type constraint. Then in the expression of R, the transformation equation from R to Q will involve explicitly the time. We look at an example. Say for example, we have a double pendulum where the first pendulum hanging from this support by a massless rigid rod. So it's freely rotating, let's say, in this plane about this point. And the second pendulum is hanging from the bob of the first pendulum. by a massless rod again, and the entire motion is in this plane. Now what could be the generalized coordinates? We have actually a 4 Cartesian coordinate here, x1, y1 and x2, y2, and this x1, y1 and x2, y2, the 4 coordinates, but we have two constraints. One is this distance is fixed and the other one is this distance, the second pendulum. It has a fixed distance from the first pendulum. So as such, after we remove them, we end up with two independent coordinates. We can choose, say for example, x1 and x2 to be our independent coordinate, or y1 and y2, or it could be theta 1 and theta 2. Usually we choose the pairs of similar kind, but there is no absolute reason to do so. We can also take a mixture, that theta for one pendulum and x for other. Usually for problems where we have rotations, pure rotation, for example here we have pure rotation, the angles are natural choices rather than the distance. So that often guides us how we should choose the generalized coordinates. We will also solve examples later involving generalized coordinates after we introduce the Euler-Lagrange equation. At that time, we will see other examples. Now, we would like to start deriving Lagrange's equation of second kind from D'Alembert's principle. So essentially, we would like to write D'Alembert's principle in an equivalent form in terms of the generalized coordinates. So we write Ri to be a function of q1, q2, q3. In general, when we write q, it represents, let's say, q1, q2, q3, qn, and then t. The total time derivative of Ri can be written in terms of chain rule as del Ri del qj times qj dot plus del Ri del t. The qj's are a scalar quantity. They're not combined as a vector. So q1, q2, q3, they could belong to single or multiple particles depending on how we remove the constraint. But in general, the time derivative of qj, the jth generalized coordinate, we call it generalized velocity. So in this equation, if we take a partial derivative with respect to qk dot, the kth generalized velocity, then what we get is del Ri del qj from the previous expression. The derivative with respect to del qk dot does not act on this because Ri is not a function of qk dot. And remember, q's are independent. So del qj dot del qk, it gives us a canonical delta jk. So if j is equal to k, it's 1, otherwise it's 0. So this is why we get del Ri del qk from this partial derivative. So we get our first important relation, del Ri dot del qk dot is equal to del Ri del qk. We call it condition A. Condition B is straightforward. We are calculating the virtual displacement of ith particle, which is using chain rule again. Sum over j del Ri del qj times delta qj. We do not get anything from the time part, even though it could be a rheonomic constant. Ri could be function of time, simply because the virtual displacements do not involve an explicit changing time. So it's like we keep it the delta t here. Suppose we could take it, then delta t is essentially 0 for virtual displacement. So del Ri is only function of del qj's, and this is our relation D. C looks a bit complicated. Let's suppose we have a quantity del Ri del qj, and we take its total time derivative. Using chain rule, we take partial derivative with respect to qk of this quantity and multiply that with qk dot, plus we take partial derivative with respect to time. And then we can interchange the partial derivatives, the standard protocol. in which case the delta Qj, the del Qj, the partial derivative could be taken out. We can carry out the derivative with respect to Qj later. If we rearrange the terms inside, then it is Ri Qk, then Qk dot, and then del Ri del T. This is nothing but Ri dot. So ddt of del Ri del Qj gives us del del Qj of Ri dot. This is also another important relation. We call it C. Now we look at the other terms. We have mass times acceleration time delta Ri. So first replacement is from B. We change or we replace the virtual displacement from R2 in terms of Q's. And then I look at the dot product inside Ri double dot dot del Ri del Qj. We write it as total time derivative of Ri dot del Ri del Qj minus Ri dot ddt of del Ri del Qj. Now you remember ddt of del Ri del Qj, we calculated that to be del Ri dot del Qj. So we substitute it here using rule C, and later inside this time derivative del Ri del Qj could also be replaced using rule A, del Ri dot del Qj dot. Now you see the interesting part. The second term, we can take del del Qj out, and then the argument is symmetric. Del del Qj can act on Ri, the first one or the second one. So as such, the previous term can be obtained. If we put a half here, then this derivative, we can take the partial derivative with respect to Qj out. We can do something similar with this term. Total time derivative is there, and we take del del Qj dot outside, and then with respect to that we are taking time derivative of Ri dot dot Ri dot. So it's basically Ri dot square. It's a regular velocity square. Remember, the Ri's, the Cartesian coordinates, are functions of the generalized coordinate, but their time derivative would be function of the generalized velocity. This is why this derivative exists. Now, if we push mi inside and take the sum over I, then this is nothing but the kinetic energy. And we already also have the similar term here. Mi goes in, we take the summation over I, and we get the kinetic energy. So, after all simplification, what we have, total time derivative of del T del Qj dot minus del T del Qj and times the Qj del del virtual displacement. This is what we get from the mass times acceleration term. But then D'Alembert principle also has a virtual work in this form, that Fi dot del Ri. Here too, we can replace quantities in this form, that we replace virtual displacement by the virtual displacement in terms of generalized coordinates, and then take the sum over this quantity Fi and del Ri del Qj. This summation, let's say we call it Qj, capital Qj. Then the virtual work can also be written in this form, the capital Qj times delta Qj. Now delta Qj is virtual displacement using generalized coordinate, and after all the left hand side has dimension of energy, so right hand side should also be energy. So kind of making a comparison, we call it generalized force. So generalized force times virtual displacement using generalized coordinates gives us energy, the same energy. Now this generalized force, it does not have to be like a physically a dimension of force. Say for example, if virtual if the generalized coordinate is an angle, then the generalized force could be the torque. So that way the dimension remains intact. So this is our relation D and we see that this relation can be directly equated with the left hand side, the relation involving the kinetic energy. If we do that, then we get the coefficient of delta Qj to be the terms involving kinetic energy and the generalized force. But then Qj's are independent and they could be arbitrary. As such, this sum will vanish only if their individual coefficient vanishes. So in this case, we can write or we get Lagrange's equation of second kind, where generalized force is some way related to the kinetic energy, various derivatives of kinetic energy. Okay. This is a general equation in the sense that any kind of external force we have, we don't need constraint. All we need to know is the external force and the generalized coordinate. And of course, we need to know how to write the kinetic energy in terms of generalized coordinate, which is usually easy. So combining all that, we get Lagrange's equation of second kind. It becomes slightly more familiar if the force is given as a special derivative of a potential, the external force. In that case, the generalized force can simply be written as, after some algebra, straightforward, that F is replaced by minus del V del Ri, and virtual displacement is replaced by the virtual displacement using generalized coordinate, and then this quantity is nothing but del V del Qj. So generalized force can be written as simply derivative of the potential energy with respect to generalized coordinate. I mean, it looks extremely simple and elegant. So we replace that in the Lagrange's equation of second kind at the place of Qj, capital Qj, and what we get is we can bring V to this side and we can write del del Qj of t minus V. Now suppose V is not a function of Qj dot, it's not a function of generalized velocity, which is almost always the case. Okay. Almost always the case that we have potential which are not functions of velocity. In that case, we can replace this t by t minus V. After all, del del Qj dot, the derivative with respect to generalized velocity, will give 0 for the V term. So we can define L, a quantity, call it Lagrangian, which is t minus V, and with L we can write our final equation as ddt of del L del Qj dot minus del L del Qj equal to 0. This is the celebrated Euler-Lagrange equation. Why is it so easy, or why is it so celebrated? Celebrated because now we only need to write down two scalar functions, the kinetic energy and the potential energy. Once we write it down, then their derivative simply will give us the equation of motion. We do not have to worry about the constant forces, nothing. Another interesting case where the potential is a function of velocity. Suppose we have such a potential such that the generalized potential can be written as ddt of del u del Qj dot minus del u del Qj. So here instead of V, it should be u. So if we have a u, a potential which is a function of generalized coordinates and generalized velocity such that the generalized force is given by this form, then of course we can take it, club it with the kinetic energy part here, and what we will get is ddt of del L del Qj dot minus del L del Qj, the same Euler-Lagrange equation, but this time Lagrangian is written in terms of t and u, not t and t. A very famous example is where the potential is given by charge times the scalar electric potential minus the charge times the vector potential dot the Cartesian velocity. For this potential, we can calculate electric field to be the special derivative, negative derivative of negative gradient of the scalar potential minus del del t of vector potential. And the magnetic field is simply the curl of A, which in our notation it is del R cross product with A. So in terms of E and B, the force is Q E plus R dot R cross B. So this is Lorentz force. So basically, if you have a particle which is experiencing Lorentz force, then it is possible to generate this Lorentz force using U. So as such, the particle dynamics can be studied by using Euler-Lagrange equation. So it's a very powerful technique because component-wise the analysis is, it's simpler in the sense that we have good knowledge about U and we do not need to know exactly which way the vectors are pointing at. An important invariance related to Euler-Lagrange equation must be studied, must be mentioned. Suppose we have a function g. G is a function of generalized coordinates and time. And then total time derivative of g, we can write it as del g del qj dot plus del g del t. Well, there is a sum over j which not there, not written, but it is there. I mean, it should be there. So again, taking a partial derivative of this equation with respect to qk dot, we get del qk dot of dg dt is equal to del g del qk. Basically, we get this coefficient just like we did it in the equation of when we were deriving the Lagrange's equation of second kind. And now, suppose we take the total time derivative of the left hand side here. That would be equal to ddt of del g del qj, and we can expand that using chain rule. So we'll have sum over k and then del 2g del qk del qj and qk dot plus the partial derivative with respect to time and qj's. We can interchange them just like the old trick and then take the del qj partial derivative with respect to qj out and we'll have dg dt inside. So we see that in ddt of del qj dot dg dt. So if we have this function g and suppose we look at its total time derivative, then total time derivative of g behaves like Lagrangian. It's identically kind of satisfied. So that means left hand side will always be equal to right hand side. So that also means, I mean, it's exactly similar as Euler-Lagrange equation, and I have written it again. Instead of dg dt, I write f. F is the total time derivative of g. Now, this equation, this line is always true for all functions g. So we can simply add it up, and this is not going to change, make a change in the equation of motion because they will cancel. I mean, this will be identically 0. So even if we change the Lagrangian by adding a total time derivative of a scalar function which does not depend on velocity, then the equation of motion does not change. It remains invariant. It's a very important result that we will use later. Another case where Euler-Lagrange equation can be extended to is if we have drag forces like viscous drag-like forces, where the force is proportional to velocity but opposite in direction. So it is somewhat like the situation where you drop a ball, a sphere, which is you drop it in a column of liquid and it's going down. Then when you try to do this experiment to verify Stokes' law, you assume that viscous drag was proportional to the velocity and acts opposite in the direction. So it is just a similar force. The force is proportional to the velocity and comes with a negative sign, and this gamma is just a coefficient. For such forces, you can define a dissipation function which can be written as half of like the same coefficient and velocity square for each component. So we have x dot square, y dot square, z dot square for ith particle, and we have for ith particle the components of gamma, x, y, z. So I mean, remember there is a sum over I which I forgot to write. I mean, so both the first and second equation will have a sum over I. So for this, from this dissipation function, it is straightforward to get the force. You just have to take a partial derivative with respect to the regular velocity, Cartesian velocity, del Ri dot. So that means if you calculate the generalized force, you try to write Fi and then del Ri del Qj. Fi is partial derivative with respect to Cartesian velocity, and del Ri del Qj, this we calculated before, one of our trick. It gives us del Ri dot del Qj dot. So we substitute that. Once you substitute that, then this velocity, it appears, and using the chain rule, and because there is no time involved here, so it directly becomes negative of partial derivative of dissipation function with respect to Qj dot with respect to a generalized velocity. So this, if we add it to the Euler-Lagrange equation, this is what we get. Now, what do I mean by adding it to Euler-Lagrange equation? Okay, let us suppose this Euler-Lagrange equation, we have a non-potential force which is coming from the the drag force. In that case, we cannot absorb that in a potential. So this T minus V, L equal to T minus V or L equal to T minus U, that part will give us the left hand side of the equation. The right hand side will still have a remnant Qj that could not be absorbed in the form of potential. For such Qj, I mean, if it exists and if it is a viscous drag like force, then we can define a dissipation function which after replacement and with we bring it to the left hand side, and it gives us the Euler-Lagrange part of the old equation plus del Qj dot of the dissipation function. So this is basically Euler-Lagrange equation extended to the dissipative systems. As we mentioned before, that Euler-Lagrange equation, one reason that why it is so easy is you just have to define two scalar quantity, the kinetic energy and potential energy, which are easy. I mean, we are familiar with the forms of energy much more than the exact nature of the forces. Now, the kinetic energy, we can write it down in this way, that this is half mi Ri dot square, essentially. By square, I mean this dot product. Replace Ri dot using the expression involving the generalized coordinate del Ri del Qj, Qj dot, sum over j, and del Ri del T. The square involves two such quantity taken dot product. And if you do a little bit of algebra, it's clear that you will have terms quadratic in Qj dots or Qj dot, Qk dot. So it's quadratic in generalized velocity. There would be a term, the cross term between the two, which is linear in generalized velocity. And there would be a term del Ri del T square when only this term is involved. It does not depend on the generalized velocity at all. So we give the names like we call it, say, m naught. This one is like a coefficient mj qj dot. Now you see, I mean, the half factor is not there for the simple reason, if you take the cross product, then if you take the product, then del Ri del T will be multiplied to this partial derivative del Ri del Qj twice. Once from the first one to the second, and then second one to first. So it's basically half plus half, that gives you 1. On the other hand, if you have Qj dot, product, then you essentially have two different sum, one on j, the other on k. That gives you del Ri del Qj and then del Ri del Qk, and you have Qj dot and Qk dot. That can also be written as mjk, Qj dot and Qk dot. So we call them kinetic energy of three types like T0, T1, T2, depending on what power of generalized velocity appears in that term. T0 is independent of generalized velocity, T1 is linear, T2 is quadratic. For scleronomic system, many of our systems scleronomic, where constraints do not depend on time, their del Ri del T is 0. So T0 and T1 vanishes. So T is homogeneous and quadratic in generalized velocity. So it's a positive number. So I mean, this is why we did this. There are two reasons. One is at a later stage of derivation, when we look at the symmetry properties, we need to know which part of the kinetic energy is depends on generalized velocity with which power, quadratic, linear, independent. I mean, this is why we did it. And moreover, at least if you have a scleronomic system, then your kinetic energy expression should not have any linear component in generalized velocity. So if you get such term, at least you would know that there is something wrong. So this is the use of writing down kinetic energy in this form.